This is Charlie Mato-Toyela with another How to Play the Native American Flute video. And today we're coming at you from a beautiful lake out here that we've come to visit with our family. It's really a wonderful location and of course a good opportunity for me to show you how to play the flute. This, again, if you've seen our other videos, is the 5-hole 2,000-year-old Western cedar flute that I've made. It's one of my favorites. I play it a lot. It's actually in the intro credits on this this video series, as well as on several of my albums, and of course also on our website. But what I'm going to do today is show you the basics on how to play the flute, and what you're going to need to start with is learning how to hold the flute with all of your fingers uncovered. If you uncovered all of your fingers while you're playing, and this is your first time playing, a lot of people say that they have a tendency to drop the flute. And of course, that may be so for some people. What I would suggest to do is to learn how to hold it without covering any of the fingerings up first. And then just practice before you even put your first air to the flute. Practice taking your fingers off of it one at a time. And with any 5-hole flute, as it is with this one, what you're going to do is you're going to cover the first hole, the highest note of course being all fingers uncovered. Cover up the first hole to make the next lowest note, and the next lower note, and then the next lower and lower and lower until you cover up this final hole, at which time the sound is actually escaping from the actual bottom of the flute here. So with all fingers covered, that's the lowest note you're going to achieve. With all fingers uncovered, that's the natural octave in most cases of most flutes that I've seen, including all of mine. All fingers uncovered is the natural octave range, one level up above this note. So just to give you an example. And you'll be able to see those fingerings on this next screenshot. So now that you know the fingerings for how to play the 5-hole flute, and of course it is pretty well the same with your 6-hole flutes, where you have to keep this finger covered at all times. With a 5-hole flute, basically the steps are, with all fingers covered is the lowest note. Take your finger off, it gets a little higher, a little higher, a little higher, higher and higher until you get to the top octave of that note. And then once again we'll talk about that little higher octave range note that we can achieve on most of my flutes and on several others, where you cover up either these 2 holes and blow fast, or you'll cover up these 3 holes and blow fast. But just to give you a little bit of tone technique so that you can learn how the cavity and chamber inside of your mouth can help determine and focus the quality of the sound coming out of the flute. Some of these techniques may not come forward on the recording here as well as it would maybe on a live studio recording or maybe on a live performance, but I'll go ahead and give you an example of how they play anyway. I tend to, on a lot of those long notes, especially the ones that I add the vibrato into, but just typically my long notes that I play anyway, I typically open my opening inside of my mouth up larger by rolling my tongue to the back of my throat. It probably comes from years of playing other instruments as well, but you can learn how to do this technique very simply. And as I discussed, something if you've ever picked up a harmonica before and tried to play it, when you blow inside of the harmonica, because the sound is so close up here to your mouth, like if you put your hand in front of your mouth and talk, you may not hear me good over the recording, but you can hear yourself really well when you do this. Putting the harmonica in front of your mouth and then opening the chamber up inside of your orifice inside of your mouth here will really help to create a much more elaborate tonal quality for you, and will give you a lot more control over the sound of the flute as well. So you'll find that it does come in pretty handy. But today we're going to really speak more about playing techniques, not including all of the breath control, which is something we're going to have a whole series, I'm sure, on that. There'll be a lot of question about it. But of course, with the playing technique, I have several steps that I tend to like to use. One of my favorites, I guess, I call the jumping bird technique. And we call it the jumping bird not because you have to jump around like a bird, but because we use your middle finger to do this on most flutes. And I know when my wife and I have gone around to a lot of schools and other events and places we've been given that step as a technique, they always laugh and chuckle and think it's funny. So I always like to use it. It's definitely a good light of a situation. But if you watch my middle finger here carefully while I play the flute, you'll see this exactly step what I'm talking about here, that you create this jumping bird sound with. So you can use that jumping bird technique. Of course, I use this hand to do it, but you can use that to really overemphasize a note. If you want to give it a different type of introduction when you're playing the note, if you want to elaborate on it before you even get to it, that's what I use it for. And it also makes kind of a nice little barking sound that people have described, I guess, more along the lines of a bark, the flute making a bark sound. So that's really something I enjoy doing a lot. But just to give you another idea of how you can use that, you can use it with several other fingers too, especially when you get up to these two notes, when of course this one's going to be uncovered. So I'll show you a couple other ways you can do it. So that gives you kind of an idea of something to play around with, the jumping bird technique, one of my favorite, like I say, steps that I use. And you can see how using this other finger here, you can create an additional, like a step up to the next note. So it's kind of a nice way to introduce the next note before you even play it. One of my other techniques that I use a lot is with the breath control, and it's also with the way you pronounce the flute's notes through your tone, I guess I can say. You overblow, or you make a staccato sound, like going ta 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 ta, or you can go la 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 to make a softer sound. You can do this and create all kinds of effects. So just to give you another idea of what I'm talking about here. And once again, using the breath control and also controlling the size of the opening inside of your mouth, and using the staccato technique all at the same time, gives it kind of what I like to call, and at least I've called in the past, one of those Anasazi feelings in a flute, because your Anasazi flute that has such a deep and mellow sound has an unusual attack. Even when you play it with any type of embouchure, it has an unusual attack in the way that it opens up and starts to pronounce the note for you before you do it. And you can actually do that by opening the orifice inside of your mouth up larger, and then going ta 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 each time that you want to pronounce the note, with the orifice inside of your mouth open large. And I know that gets very complex and very complicated, and certainly, you know, once again, with the embouchure alone, I'm sure we could make an entire video out of that. But with this particular lesson today, I wanted to show you more along the lines of different ways to play that scale, which is what we've been focusing here. If you've noticed, all I've done is gone up and down the scale, and I've introduced each note in a different way. And certainly that would get very boring after a while if that's all you did, and there are people that make a very good living doing that. So I mean, certainly it doesn't mean that you can't continue to do it that way. But if you want to kind of change things up, that'll be in some of the upcoming lessons we talk about as well. With this 5-hole flute, because of the size and diameter it is, and because of the tone it is, because of the type of wood it is, and because of the hardness of the wood or softness of the wood, depending on what kind of wood it is, you have different types of qualities of sound that you can achieve. Now, this doesn't mean that I think you should go out and buy a low E-flat minor flute, because you know that will only achieve a certain type of quality, just as this one here can achieve a certain range. And by all means, a good flutist can make the most out of anything, but even a beginner, the limitations that a beginner has will still be echoed somewhat down the road into the advanced flutist. You only, of course, have so many notes that you can play on here. In this particular flute, I can play 7 notes, and that's it. I can play half-covered notes, which we'll talk about in another event, but I can't make it go any higher than the certain range that it's at already, and I can't certainly make it go any lower. I can play the chromatic scale between the bottom note that it can produce and the top note it can produce, but the flute itself, because of its wood that it's made of, because of the diameter in the inside, the length of the flute, because of how hard the flute is and how I've hardened it. I actually go through a process of hardening my flutes, which we can, you know, talk about, of course, in the how to play, or excuse me, how to make the flute videos that we're going to be making next. But depending on how hard the flute is, and sometimes determined by the type of wood it's being used, it has an ability to produce a certain type of feature that you can't produce in a higher pitched or much lower pitched flute. And that's pretty much the last thing that we're going to talk about today. And I'll show you first on this flute the different types of echoey and acoustic type sounds that it can make, and then I'll play the exact same tones and notes on one of my smaller flutes, and you'll see that it doesn't produce those, but then we'll go into what the smaller one can do for you. So once again, just to give you an idea of the sound of the recording we're going to play here for you, for the duplicate of the other smaller flute. Okay, and this is back with the 5-hole Cherokee flute that I play a lot as well, the one that my son made. This flute, being a higher pitched flute, will give you a different tone quality than the other one will. And of course, because it's made out of river cane, and because it's a smaller flute diameter, and for many other reasons, of course, because of how hard, you can probably hear that almost echoing in the background, how hard this particular piece of reed is. Because of all of that, the flute will tend to make a different sound, even with that same scale and same very simple little song that I just played for you, and I'll show you. So not exactly mirroring the other song that we played, but when you start playing one of these types of flutes, you'll notice that you tend to go a different direction too with it. So I was trying to fight some of the types of things that I wanted to play with this one that I can't play on the other one, just so that I could show you more along the lines of what the original song would sound like played on this type of flute. But on this smaller 5-hole flute, we will discuss a few of the other things. This one makes a bark that has kind of a whistle to it. I guess more of a high-pitched, like a bird type whistle whenever it barks. And you may have noticed already, because I do have a tendency to bark that jumping bird finger. But anyway, when I play that, it actually has a much higher sound that it can create, and it does make a very beautiful sound as well. So it can certainly be used for some wonderful different techniques to be played, and with even the higher flute yet, which we may discuss later on. That one has its own realm and own threshold for talent that you can develop from playing it. But I'll show you a little bit more of what this one here can do based on the type of flute and the size and diameter and type of wood it is. Some of the other techniques that it will allow you to do are mostly in the higher range, of course, but the sound quality of it whenever it does there is definitely a bigger difference between that and the deeper tone one. So I hope you've enjoyed this video on how to play the Native American flute. Of course, we've discussed a few very simple techniques today, and more to come, of course, with all the people asking for different types of videos. We'll certainly have a lot of work ahead of us, but anytime you feel like you'd like to request a certain type of video or something that you would like to see me to do specifically with a flute, please ask. And certainly, you know, your comments and subscribing to our channel is very appreciated. If you'd like to visit our website, of course, the information for it is also at the bottom of this video. And you know, keep playing the flute. I hope you enjoy it. And certainly, if you've gotten any of mine, and have any questions about them, or if you have any questions about anything flute related, please let me know. I'll be glad to respond to all of those emails as soon as I can. So thanks again, and Charlie Mato-Toyela again signing off for now. And you have a great day.